Greetings, people who really like the accordion. My last video, 13A, was really bad. I made many mistakes. So instead of doing it over again, because if I do it over, I'll make mistakes again, I figured I'd just do this addendum. I'd add this stuff and hope that my message from the last video was a little bit more clear if I say this. In the last video, I showed how to make chords using just bass buttons, and I used the alto tenor register, the switch on the bass, as an example. Then I showed how when you don't use the contralto reed set, your tones are pretty well balanced. You see, your C's are balanced, your E's are balanced, and your G's are balanced if you play a C major chord, for example, right? But I don't know if I failed to mention or get the point across that the thing is, when you select a register on your bass side, when you select a switch, if the switch you select activates the contralto reed set, then it's going to throw the chords created, it's going to throw them off balance just a little bit. It's going to be acceptable, but it's going to be a little bit off. And I want to show you why. I didn't make this clear in the last video. If you use a register that includes the contralto reed set, you're going to have a little different situation. For example, I showed you this here. I showed you that when I selected the alto, contralto, tenor, bass register, that you have the C4 is duplicated in the alto and contralto reed set, and I showed you how the E4 is duplicated in the alto and contralto reed sets, and the G3 is duplicated here in the contralto and tenor reed sets, which means, as I mentioned, those tones might have just a slight preponderance, just a slight advantage. And the reason is because of this, and I didn't show this, I failed to show this. If you select a chord, let's say a major chord, the tones that you choose, affect how your contralto reed set works with the other reed sets. For example, here you'll see, if you can see this, if you select the alto, contralto, tenor register, like I just showed you, this one here, okay, if you select this, depending on which chord you play, you see that in the contralto reed set, the tones that go from C to F, those tones in that contralto reed set will fortify that same tone range in the alto reed set. But if you have, let's say, in that chord that you're playing, let's say you have a G3. Well, in that contralto reed set, that G3 is gonna bolster that G3 in the tenor reed set. You see, so the contralto reed set, the tones in there go from C4 to D4, and they will fortify those very same tones that are in the alto reed set. But down here, if you select, if the chord includes an F sharp or a G sharp 3 or an A3, it's not going to be F sharp 4 to B4, it's F sharp 3 to B3. It's going to fortify those same tones in the tenor reed set. See, I don't know if I made that clear, but this is the crux of the reed set selection, the bass register selection. In other words, and I'll say it again, I know it's repetitious, but I want to make it clear. When you choose a bass register, a switch that activates a contralto reed set, it's going to affect the balance of the tones in the other reed sets just slightly, depending on what chord you pick, because those chord tones will fall within this range as they're sounded with the contralto reed set. So that's what I wanted to make clear. think about it, work it out, and you'll figure out in your brain, say, oh, I understand. Now I see what he's talking about. Because people who just tune in randomly to my videos, like let's say right in the middle, will say, what the hell is he talking about? So getting back to the making chords with bass buttons only, another point I tried to make was you have two bass ranks. In other words, you would call them rows. You probably call them rows, but they're ranks. One is the counter bass rank or row, and the other one's the bass rank or row. You can call it a row. They are two ranks, but they are all bass buttons. You can call them counter bass. In other words, complementary bass, whatever you want to call it, but they're all still bass buttons. Okay? And in the last video, I spoke incorrectly. I pointed to this and I said C minor 7 because I'm an idiot. But I meant to say C major 7 on that chart I showed. And while we're at it, I want to show the configuration for making the major chords with the bass buttons only. In other words, the bass and or counter buttons only. This is a little bit neater. The last chart I made was sloppy. Here's one way to do it, and here's the other way to do it. And I talked about that. Okay, this is a little bit neater. Here's the chart to show how to make the minor chord with using bass buttons only, whether it be counter bass or bass, whatever. See, this particular configuration uses only the bass rank or the bass row, but that's a little bit neater. This top one shows, for example, the A minor chord. This one shows, as an example, the C minor chord. And see, that's neater. Here's the dominant seventh chords, the two configurations. And when I talked about this last time, I mentioned that this button here would probably be listed as A sharp on your handy Stradella button chart, but that's okay because the A sharp and B flat are the same thing. They're written differently, but they sound the same. So those are the two dominant 7 ways to make chords using only bass buttons. Here's the minor 7th configurations. This one's tough because you got to scrunch your fingers together. Remember, I had trouble with that, making that, but it's fun. Once you practice, it's better. And then here's the other way to do it, using only the bass row. That's a little bit neater than my previous charts. They were really sloppy. That last video was hideous. I'm ashamed, but like I said, to do it over there'd be mistakes anyway. And here's the other leftover chords configurations. You have the major 7. You have the dominant 7 with this. It's called a suspension. Traditional people call it that. I don't do that this way in my book. I'll show you that later in my my videos when I show my chord system. But anyway, so this is the traditional dominant 7 with that suspended 4th tone, and I showed you that one. It's a beautiful thing. And then here's the diminished 7th configuration using bass buttons only, whether it be counter bass or bass, doesn't matter. And then that A there. Okay, as far as this, let's say this C diminished 7 chord, that A is actually really a B double flat, but it doesn't matter because they're written differently, but they sound the same. You can pause your video and write these down if you want to, because I don't see anybody else on the internet talking about this. I couldn't find anybody, and there's 5 billion videos on YouTube. I couldn't find anybody. Now, I wanted to make this clear also. in one of my videos on dominant chords, I showed the C9 suspension. In other words, the C dominant 9 suspended chord with the suspended 4. I showed that, and I listed these tones. Now, I don't want you to get confused, because when I was showing that, we were using the bass and chord buttons. We were using the bass button, a bass button here, and a chord button here to make this chord. All right? And that chord would normally, not always, but normally resolve to the C dominant 7. And of course the 5th generally is omitted. Not always, but generally. So I showed you that, but we were using bass and chord buttons. In my last video, I was showing you how to make the C7, dominant 7 suspended chord with that suspended 4, but we were using bass buttons only, so don't be confused. You say, well, what the hell is he talking about? He's showing two different things. No, one was to show how to make it with the bass and chord buttons, and the other is to show how to make it with only bass buttons. And once again, I'll show you in a future video when I play my song. You'll see how I use this, and it's beautiful. So what happens here is, as I mentioned previously, the F generally, not always, but generally will resolve to the E, and that's said to make it perfectly clear that you understand I was talking about two different things. One, making the dominant chords with bass and chord buttons, and the other with only bass buttons, okay? So I hope I made that clear that up. Now, there's two things that are very important about my videos, and I hope that somebody understood this. I hope somebody out there, there's a lot of people out there, actually understand what I was trying to say. You know, the beginner might say, oh, that's terrible. He's saying all this stuff. I don't know what the hell he's saying. The whole point is for the 120 bass Stradella system, you can use all 5 fingers if you want to. All right? You don't have to, but you can. But the beauty is, the Stradella system is set up such that the bottom rank, or you would call it a row, the bottom row, the row of diminished 7 chord buttons allows you to make dominant 7 chords. You see, that's a beautiful thing. And if you throw in the pinky and the thumb, then you don't have to jump around like a maniac. And I already showed you why. So the beautiful thing is, the two beautiful things that I must stress is the diminished 7th bottom row or rank, all right, can be used to make dominant 7 chords. And it does so in such a way that your hand doesn't have to jumping all around. It's messy that way. Okay, now, to prove my point, let me just quickly, and then I'll wrap it up, quickly show you what I'm talking about. Now this chart is small. I hope you can see it. But again, the crux, the heart of the matter is this. You can play a C dominant 7, all right? You can play in the traditional position with the C bass and the C dominant 7 chord button. You see on here, I would use my ring finger for this, and I would use my index finger for the C7 button. And you're all probably familiar with this because this is the way people have been playing it for decades, for a long, long time. And the chord you end up with is the C dominant 7, but the G, the 5th, is not there because of the nature of the buttons. Now, we talked about that. So you see, you can play the C7 in a traditional position with certain fingers, and you get a certain chord. That's what you get. That's the net result. I have tried to show you many times with the 5-finger system, you can play that same C dominant 7 with the C bass button, but you use, instead of the dominant 7 button, you use you can see on here, maybe you can see this, it's small, the G diminished 7 button. All right, the C bass with the G diminished 7 button, and the net result then is the full C dominant 7 chord. The 5th is not missing, it's there. It gives you a richer sound, and in certain cases, it's easier to play. So you see that? We talked about that, but that's the heart of the matter. Now, you say, well, this bottom rank here, that's the diminished seventh button rank. But when you use that bottom row, the diminished seventh row, you don't always get a full diminished chord. This is the thing, you don't always get it. I'll show you why. Let's say you're playing a chord progression. You want to go from C major to C sharp diminished to D minor and G7. You'll see this in a lot of old standards, a lot of old songs. Let's say you want to go from C minor to C sharp diminished to D minor, G7, and back to C again. Well, the move from C major, all right, C bass, C major chord button, I would do it with my 5-finger way. I would move my finger. I would use the index finger to play the C sharp counter bass button. Then I would use, you've seen me do it, my thumb to play the E diminished seventh button. All right? And the chord I would get, the net result, would be the tones C sharp, E, and G. But the B flat, the seventh tone in that chord, that proper diminished seventh chord, is missing. So you see, I'm using the bottom rank or row, the diminished seventh button row, and I'm not getting a full diminished seventh chord because the B flat tone is missing. To get this, you'd have to play a B flat bass button with this button. You understand that? I'm saying that if you use a button on the diminished seventh bottom row, you don't always get a full diminished seven chord. So I'll hold this up and you can stop it and write it down or think about it. But this is the heart of the matter. This is the beautiful thing, the most beautiful thing about the 120 bass Stradella system right here. And I failed to show this before because I thought that you would understand this, but I don't speak clearly, so I'm showing this. This is very important. Now, the other thing I mentioned, which is very important, is I said repeatedly, and my word is good, that with my system, or the system developed by Mr. Roberts, and I'm pretty sure he developed this back in the 1930s or 40s, all right? But the another thing I said was, you know what? You don't have to jump around like a maniac. To go from C major to B7, ordinarily, you'd have to go from C major, all right, and jump all the way down to the B button and the B dominant 7 button. You'd have to make that big jump. I hope I'm speaking correctly. When I play this back, I'll probably find like 10,000 mistakes. So I said, you know, you can do this without jumping like a maniac. So you play your C major chord, you move with your pinky, all right, with your pinky to the B bass button. That's on your counter bass rank or row, you would call it a row. And then with your thumb, all right, with your thumb, you catch the F sharp diminished 7 button, and you not only have your B dominant 7th chord, but you have the full B dominant 7th chord, and the 5th is not missing. I tried to stress this repeatedly in my videos, and I got to tell you, this is the heart of the matter. I should have showed this early on, and I was remiss. I goofed up. I forgot to show this. This is very important. Now, with this move, okay, you're kind of moving with your hand up toward the top of the accordion. But you can go from C major to B7, B dominant 7, the other way, moving kind of down toward the bottom of your accordion. All right, you have your C, major chord here, and you move to your B with your index finger. I'll make that pretty clear. And you catch the G flat dominant, G flat diminished 7 button with your pinky. And if you do that, you get the full B dominant 7 chord again. And the fifth is not missing. And the beauty of it is, if you practice this, it's easy and it comes naturally. You go boom, 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 boom. You go boom, boom, boom with these two. And if you didn't do it this way, my way, you'd have to jump from, watch this, that C major all the way down to B, the B bass with the B7 dominant button. I mean, look at that jump. It's awful. So this is the heart of the matter, and I apologize. I apologize for everything I've ever done and said in my life up to this point. No, seriously. It's kind of a very spiritual thing. The heart of the matter is you can make many different chord combinations. But to me, the most important is using the bottom diminished 7th row to make dominant 7th chords in an easy way. It's an easy way. And also using this system such that you don't have to make those tremendous jumps. They're tremendous. And that's it. And I apologize for all my boo-boos in the other videos, but I think I covered everything. The stuff that I do and talk about and write about that other people don't. I don't see anybody else doing it, and I hope it's helpful. Seriously. And that's it. Thanks for being incredibly patient. Thanks for watching. And maybe we'll see you again when I get back to my fun accordion songs. Good night.